close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go. Finding life along the way, melodies we haven't played. No, I don't want no rest. Echoing around these walls, fighting to create a song. I don't wanna miss a beat. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go.
All right, let's see. How's everyone doing tonight? Hope everyone had a good Thursday. There's a lot going on this week. There's, for basketball fans, March Madness going on. St. Patrick's Day is today, so warmer weather, hopefully. So hope you all had a good day, good week. You know, tomorrow's Friday. Thanks for joining the stream. We got some fun things for tonight, and also looking ahead. So as always, if you're new to the stream, you know, feel free to put, talk in the chat. This is more of a collaborative session, if you will. I do a lot of studying off stream, so it's nice to be able to chat and, just see what's going on with everyone. As we try to, we're all one big community, and I like to hear about what people are working on. So please feel free to, get in the chat and let's have a discussion. So for those that are new, if there's anyone new, obviously my name's Dan, DevNet Dan on Twitter, if you found me there, or YouTube. And kind of just going through my learning journey, as I call it, or I guess I kind of phrased it, my road to the DevNet expert. So it's studying for the DevNet expert exam. It's a lab exam. It's an 8-hour lab exam. I have to travel to a testing location, and that is actually in Texas. I have it booked. I have the lab booked. It is for May 3rd, and we're kind of in the final stretch here. It seems crazy enough. Hey Nick, how are you doing? I see you in the chat. And so, it's kind of, I just noticed this week, like looking at this study plan, I remember creating it like at least a rough outline and thinking, oh yeah, this is like 17 weeks. And it's still like there's still 6-7 weeks left, but obviously the last couple weeks it's going to be crunch time. So anyways, looking ahead, for the stream at least, we have, I kind of looked at it, and we have about 4 streams left. Nick says I'm all right. Well, I hope all right is really good. I mean, that makes me feel like something's up. So I hope if you are going through something, hope you are doing fine. And hey, you made it to the stream. We made it to Thursday, right? You're almost one day left of the week. So we have about 4 weeks. So I'm kind of looking at it as about 4 streams left. Well, 3, including this one. 4 including this one, 3 left after tonight. So I'm thinking we'll cover Docker tonight. Kubernetes next week. That just makes sense, going off of Docker right into Kubernetes. And you'll notice I kind of mixed up and changed up these weeks here, 13 through 15. This was at one point all Kubernetes. But then this past couple weeks, I've been looking at this study plan. And so Nick says he finally finished writing his database questions. Cool. Yeah. I mean, databases are very interesting because it's kind of outside the wheelhouse of like your normal Python software development and network engineering. So, but I think we've talked about on the stream before. Personally, I'm not like a database enthusiast. I don't like, if it can store my data, great. But I do have respect for the different types of databases out there. So, anyways, going back to the kind of how I redid some of this, right? So I had Kubernetes originally for like 4 weeks. I noticed it was like almost a month, right? And I was like, I don't know if that makes sense. Because if you look on the exam topics here, containers overall, which includes Kubernetes, is only 10%, right? So why spend 4 weeks out of my 17 on topics that are on 10% of my exam? I totally understand, right? Docker, Kubernetes, that is kind of the core of building an application and orchestrating a microservices architecture. But I think I can knock it out within a couple weeks, especially having a background studying for like DevCore and some of the other DevNet exams. So anyways, so we'll knock out Docker Kubernetes the next couple weeks. And then Ansible here, I noticed up here in the yellow, I marked it yellow because I really didn't cover everything during this week. I wanted to cover Terraform, Ansible, and CI/CD. But Terraform, this is like one of the first times I really dove deep into it, and it took up most of that week, so I didn't get everything done. So, and with Ansible being such an important topic, especially with configuration management and diving into automating network devices, I wanted to just get an entire week just to Ansible, so that way I have a solid grounding on that. Nick said, I started this Python for Network Engineers by Kirk Byers, so I have that going for me. Been working on Nick Russo's study plan, just finished his week 2 material. Yeah, I think I saw your tweet actually. Might have been earlier today. Yeah, Kirk Byers, I've been signed up to that his email list for a few years now, and I look at sometimes the free courses he has. They're very solid, and since he's one of the maintainer and the creator of like NetMiko, solid course. Very very easy to understand. I watched some of his videos as well. I think they're on Vimeo. I think that's how you pronounce it, Vimeo. Very, very good place to start. Like with NetMiko and kind of just getting a good solid grounding on that. And then obviously his contributions with Nornir as well. So yeah, very, very solid. So back to the study plan. Ansible, I just felt like I needed some more practice with it. And then same thing with CI/CD, but I also, this week is interesting because I'm going to also focus on software development practices and some just kind of basic, more, I don't want to say soft skills, but kind of those things that you have to understand to implement, if that makes sense. Guidelines, I guess you could say, right? So kind of going over guidelines and then implementing CI/CD pipeline this week. And then I figure these last few weeks, since it's software design, reviewing software architecture and design patterns, and then security, and then jumps right into that last week of review. This is kind of the period where I'll be going dark, per se. I won't be streaming these last few weeks, and really I'll be heads down every night. I am already, but as you guys can imagine with the stream, I kind of have to, with Thursdays, I have to be a little more lenient towards how deep am I going, because I want to make it, engaging for everyone. So, so the streams probably will stop. My last stream will be the the Thursday of this week, which I believe is let me pull up my little calendar here. The 7th, April 7th will be my last stream here. I will say I have an idea to create like I like to call it like a final project. And I want to do it like on a Saturday. So I think I mentioned on Twitter, there's a few people on Twitter that would love to join the live streams that actually watch the VODs on YouTube, the recordings. And I'd really like to get their, hold on, just want to make sure that doesn't time out. I'd really like to get them involved as well. And I've always said like, I'd love to do a Saturday stream, and Saturdays and Sundays come and go as you guys, as everyone knows. Weekends kind of just fly by. But I figure a Saturday stream as like a grand finale that will try to implement a lot of what I learned kind of throughout all these weeks, and and a lot of you as well, those that have been through most of these streams. And it'll be engaging. I might even try setting up like a call, like a Discord call or something like that, and maybe I'll be on a Discord call and we can chat, and I'll just stream it. So we can code. I can work on this project. I'll live stream it, and then I'll open up like a Discord room or something like that, and people can just come in and out as they please, and we could talk. I figured that might be more of like a 3 to 4 hour stream. I'm sure it'll go longer if we get a lot of people in there, but I thought that'd be kind of a cool idea. So, if you're watching this or if you're in the stream now, give me a thumbs up. Let me know if that's a good idea. Hit me up on Twitter. Let me know. I'd really like to get people involved, but then also, it kind of keeps me company, and we go through and maybe build some sort of cool piece of software, right? Related to network automation. So, anyways, that will probably be this Saturday, which I think is the 16th. It's basically a month from now. April 16th, yeah. I'm aiming, I still got to check my schedule with this, but like April 16th, maybe doing a Saturday stream, 4 hours or so. And yeah, make it interactive. And that'll be kind of like the grand finale, right? And then, like I said, I'll be going dark these last 3 weeks, really. And then it'll be the test day. And we'll kind of be at the end of that road, hopefully for good. Hopefully, like, first time. I know that's very unlikely, but hopefully, first time, May 3rd is it. But no matter what, we've had this nice long journey. So, all right. So tonight we're gonna go over Docker containers, and the idea is we're gonna go over build a application. Very simple, very, very simple, because obviously we're not worried about the software development tonight. We're focused on the Docker side. So a simple Flask application, we'll containerize it, build the image, and then deploy it. And we'll kind of go over that. And also, on the flip side, we will also take a look at the expert lab, the DevNet expert lab, the candidate workstation VM that Cisco just released last week. I know I was off last week. Might have been two Fridays. No, last Friday. I think it was last Friday. They released the candidate workstation. And if you're not sure what that is, stay tuned. We will dive into it. Seeing Nick, I like having something to do to really work on what I'm learning. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think Kirk's Python for Network Engineers course it's solid for that. Okay. So I and just to quickly highlight, we're going to be going over this basically most of section 4 tonight, creating a Docker image and then exposing ports, copying files, running commands, volumes. I'm not going to go over all of it, but if you're curious, it's mostly section 4 minus 4.3, which is talking about Kubernetes, which will be next week. So, all right. So the candidate workstation. Well, like what are we talking about here? So this lovely web page here, I'm sure everyone is tired of seeing because I bring it up almost on every stream. I was thinking about it. I almost remember the date that like it was last published, and I think it was like October 19th of 2021, because that's when it was like the expert exam was officially announced, and they released this equipment and software list. But it was most recently updated because they added some instructions on how to deploy the candidate workstation. And what that means is it's an OVA image of the candidate workstation that will actually be on the exam, that I'll be using during the exam, which I think is awesome. Because I think one of the first hurdles that, as dumb as it sounds, one of the first hurdles that I feel like I would have to get over is the environment, right? Like, okay, the keyboard, the mouse, and then the launching of the desktop. Like, okay, I don't have icons for this, or where's this? You know what I mean? Just like little stuff that, like, yes, it doesn't really take up many brain cycles, but at the same time, whenever you're stressing yourself out about an expert level exam, you kind of want to have a good feeling for it. So I really appreciate the Cisco learning team for releasing this. Obviously working with the DevNet team. But so anyways, it's an OVA image of the actual candidate workstation that's in the exam. So I mean, it's awesome. It's based on Ubuntu 2004. And we kind of knew this because remember I tried building this, or I would say for the most part, built a replica of it. Like I downloaded Ubuntu 2004 and then downloaded all of these software packages and the extensions for VS Code. But, that was good practice. But now I don't need to do that. I downloaded the OVA. I deployed it on my local ESXi server. Super simple to set up. Literally just import it. It takes a while to import, and then I started it up. The nice part, so the only caveat is, and this might just be, I'm on ESXi 6.7. Whenever I open the console, I get a black box, and I had this issue. I've never resolved it, obviously, but I actually went through and like re-imported the OVA. And I was having some issues with that. But anyways, I went through and I was like, okay, like, come on, Dan, let's outthink a virtual machine here, okay? It says it's in a good state, right? ESXi, is saying it completed successfully, status looks normal, like the VM looks like it's up and running. So I was like, all right, let's SSH to it. Or let's use, because RDP is enabled as well. So I SSH to it, everything looked fine. So I was like, all right, cool. And then I RDP to it, and everything looked fine as well. So basically, console's not working. However, I don't use the console anyways. And honestly, I wouldn't use it once I had RDP working. It's just one of those weird flukes that maybe it's just an issue I'm having. But anyways, so I have a nice little RDP shortcut here, and this is a fresh launch. So I powered it up just to make sure it works, but then I restarted it right before the live stream. So this is like fresh. Once you import it and power it on for the first time, this is what it would look like. So it's just asking to connect. And so you get prompted with the RDP screen here. It's asking for a password. So that password, I know it, but just to show you, if you scroll down to the end of the software list here, it says how to install CWS. And CWS, by the way, candidate workstation. That's what it stands for. But you'll see that there is a root user, but for the exam, you'll only have access that the expert user does. So 1234 QWER. So 1234 QWER exclamation. All right. So out of the box, this is what happens, right? I didn't change any of this. I did load this up this weekend, and I did change some like Git settings, like change like the Git email and the Git user, so that way I could download my GitHub repositories and like contribute to them. But I have not messed with any of the startup or anything like that. So you'll see that it connects to a 192.168.5.254 address in a web browser. Reading through the instructions, you'll see that this is actually like a repository for all the documentation they provide. As I've mentioned before on the stream, Cisco provides a bunch of documentation for the exam. So, your APIs, Python libraries, all that good stuff. All of it's available to you in a kind of a closed environment. And this is, I guess, the homepage for that repository of documentation. So we'll just exit out of that. And then you also get prompted with this terminal. It says, this workstation has been configured and prepared, and all code repositories are located at source tasks. So I imagine this is obviously where your list of tasks will be. I already looked there. They made sure not to keep any of those tasks in here or on the VM. But yeah, I'm assuming that's kind of where I'll be looking to do the practical piece. The Git client's already been configured with the right name and email, and all SSH keys necessary in GitLab are set up and working. Virtual environments, there's 3 Python virtual environments. So there's main, Ansible, and Yang Suite. So we're in main right now. So if we do a pip list, the main one I think has pretty much everything installed. I don't know if it has Ansible actually. No. So it doesn't have Ansible, but it has PyATS, it has Genie, NTC templates, NetMiko, Scrapply. It has all Flask, I'm pretty sure as well. Hold on. I didn't check that one actually. Yeah, Flask is here, 114. So yeah, it has. This is kind of the one we'll probably be in a lot. But let's let's deactivate, and let's source from. Hold on, I think it's VENVs. Yeah, VNVs, and then Ansible was another one. Oops. And I apologize if you can't see it, or it's hard to see. I don't know how to zoom in with an RDP window. But basically, I'm in the Ansible Python virtual environment that they already have prepared. And I'm just doing a pip list to show all the dependencies. So you'll see this Ansible virtual environment's a much smaller list. We have Ansible, Jinja2, PyYAML. So this is strictly just Ansible, right? If we just were using Ansible, this is the environment we'd use for that. And then the last one's Yang Suite. I don't know, because Yang Suite is already deployed. I think it's deployed as a service. I have to double check. I have to read through the instructions again, but I can get to Yang Suite in the browser. But let me just check on what we have here. So if I do a pip list, this is the last Python virtual environment that's present on the box. You'll see Cisco GNMI, Docker, Jinja, NetMiko, Protobuf, PyYAML, and then Yang Suite down here at the bottom. Request library. So it'll be interesting. I imagine the questions are going to be around, okay, using this virtual environment, using this virtual environment solve these problems. And it kind of will be more open. Kind of the way I picture it is it'll be more open-ended of like, okay, use this virtual environment, use the tools available to you. And it might be specific to say use Ansible, but like in this case, right, we have the request library here. We have PyYang, right? So PyYang obviously helps dissect a Yang data model for us. We have, I thought I saw NetMiko here. Yeah, NetMiko. We do have Django here, but I think Django though is related to Yang Suite. I think a lot of this is just a bunch of Yanks. This is a bad example because I think a lot of these dependencies are just because we installed Yang Suite. But let me go back to just the main, because that's the one that has all the good stuff. Yeah. So I mean, we have TTP, text FSM, Scrapply, netconf, request library, PyATS, Genie, NetMiko. So you kind of get where I'm going, right? Using a specific virtual environment, maybe to answer a question. I imagine most of it will be using main for 90% of the questions, but that's just kind of my guess. But so yeah, so that's the terminal. Obviously nothing crazy here. Let me just do a quick ls to show you what's in here. So we have Yang Suite, the virtual environments, and then source, just to show you nothing's really in source. We have task, and there's no hidden files either. So, but that's where the task will be, I imagine. Code here I actually created myself. So if we go to code, this is actually I cloned the GitHub repository, or my GitHub repository, and then changed the Git settings as well. So if we do git config list, yeah, you'll see my username and email here. So, all right. So speaking of, let's jump right into the code. And I'll zoom in this. I know how to zoom in this in VS Code, so I'll zoom in a couple here, because I know this can be tough to see. Oops. What the? Control. Oh, no. Oh, there we go. All right, I'm gonna keep it like that. I'm just looking at the stream preview. All right. So we have. So this is my. This is the GitHub, the DevNet expert GitHub repository that I have. And like I showed, I changed around the Git username and email so that way I can authenticate to it. Just bringing it up to date here because I did a little bit of work already, but we're gonna start fresh. So I copied over another Flask application that I built before, but we're gonna start brand new. So we're gonna call this, we're gonna stay within the Docker folder and call it stream app, right? And we're gonna just create a app.py and oops, and we're gonna switch into that folder here. All right, so we're in the folder. I'm gonna actually go through and do pip freeze. and because I'm basically just downloading or getting a list of what's installed in this Python virtual environment, which I'm in main right now. So it should just be everything. There we go. See? So it's just everything I currently have installed in this Python virtual environment. And Flask is already here, so that shouldn't be a problem to build the Flask app. So I guess I'll try to talk through it as I go, so that way it's, it makes a little more sense, because the goal obviously is not to build out an extravagant application right now. It's really just to show how we can create an application and then containerize it. And once you have it containerized, you can deploy it a multitude of ways. You can do it just using Docker run and then just doing the name of the container. You can use a Docker compose file, which I'll show an example of. And then next week, we'll dive into Kubernetes, which Kubernetes, I'm sure everyone's heard of it, but everyone's like, what the heck is it? It's really just an orchestration tool for containers. So it kind of is, I think what's the, I can't think of the name of the logo. It's like the steering wheel of the ship, but it has a name. It's not the stern. You get my point though, right? The Kubernetes logo. That's really what it, that's every time I think of Kubernetes, I think of that logo, but then I think how relatable it is. It really is like, I just picture like a big ship, like a pirate ship, right? And below it just has a bunch of barrels of Docker containers, and each of those barrels are a pod that has a Docker container in it. And if you're not sure what a pod is, it's basically the smallest unit that can be managed by Kubernetes. And then typically you have kind of each pod has its own responsibility or function, and you stick, and like I always think of like containers and pods having a 1-to-1 ratio. So anyways, I'll quit with the story time, because that's kind of the way I think of it though, right? Kubernetes is steering the ship, and it has a huge like cargo of just a bunch of Docker containers, and it helps control how many there are, where they're located, all that fun stuff. So we'll dive into it next week. I won't start geeking out about Kubernetes this week. Okay, so back to the regularly scheduled program here, a Flask application. So I'm going to cheat with the Flask application, only because if we run into any sort of issues, I want to make sure that we can address them. I think it's from Flask, import Flask, right? Yeah, import Flask equals Flask name, and then we'll just do a app route, and we'll say methods equal get, and then we'll say index return hello world. And what we'll do is say if this module, right, if this module gets called on directly, we'll say app.run, and I think it's host equals. I think it's host, and we'll say debug true. I think that's right. Let me just cheat real quick, and I'll show you this as well. This is actually from an old stream for those that were here, where we were looking at data serialization. This was like, man, holy crap, this is like months ago, where we created a MySQL database, and we used SQL Alchemy to basically create tables, and then serialize the data using Marshmallow. Marshmallow is the name of the Python library. And then I'm pretty sure, did we ever get to the API aspect? Yeah, we did. Yeah, so we even, and we use Marshmallow to deserialize the data from the database table. And we built a little API. It didn't have any security, so it wasn't like crazy, but anyways, that was actually kind of fun. And then I actually have another, this was using Flask, SQL Alchemy, Marshmallow. I think that's it. Because what I was working on before that was a application using Fast API and SQL model, which if you've never heard of those, but you've heard of Flask and you kind of understand what that is, I would highly recommend taking a look at Fast API and SQL model. Both libraries have the same maintainer, same creator, I guess you could say too. What's his name? Sebastian, I think. But anyways, phenomenal libraries and really good documentation. Actually, Fast API or SQL model taught me more about databases than some books. I'm not lying to you. It really are phenomenal. So I would highly recommend you checking them out. Nick says, speaking of databases, I have an idea of my own. Create one for all of my Cisco books so I get experience designing code to interact with programmatic. Create one for all my Cisco books. Yeah. I guess, do you mean like having a table that's like your authors, your title, publisher, like that sort of thing, like where almost like an inventory of your book collection? I guess, yeah, if that's what you're referring to. Anyways, so yeah, this was a fun little project. Don't worry, I will say after the DevNet expert, I'm gonna go back to streaming. Don't like once I have a little bit of a break, but I will definitely be coming back into these littler projects and trying to like revitalize them. I don't want to ditch them and then be like, okay, like that was fun. Okay, host, debug true, use reloader. That's the one I always miss. Which, to be honest, I don't know if I actually need this one. Actually, I don't need this. Well, I'll just keep it, but I don't need this one because we're in a container. I can just restart the container. Yeah, so Nick said table for ISBN, authors, contents, and then database inventory. Yep. Yeah, that'd be cool. If you're unfamiliar with what an ORM is, with Python, like an object relational mapper, it's called. Highly recommend SQL model. And even if you don't use the library, I know SQL Alchemy is one of the popular ORM tools. SQL model has phenomenal documentation, and it will teach you a lot about how you can create database tables and define them using Python code versus using like raw SQL. But if you want to learn SQL, then have at it. All right, so let's see if this works. So Python app.py. All right, so localhost 5000. Just use Firefox. So I should just return. I only have one route. It's going to return hello world in a very silly way. Here's just for those curious. Here's Yang Suite. It's on localhost 84 port 8480. And I didn't do anything. This is just running in the background. So kind of neat. It looks like it has to get set up, but I do plan to, I don't want to touch this since it's a clean install. I'm not going to touch it until I review Yang Suite and like Yang data models in those final couple weeks where I'm kind of just, head to the keyboard. So I'm not going to touch it, but yeah, it's this just by default is running for you. The only piece of software or tool that you have to install is NSO. Okay, there you go. So we have Hello World running in the localhost port 5000. So we have our Flask application. Pretty cool. And like I mentioned, I'm not going to go deeper than this, but you can imagine, right? You can build out a Flask application like this tool here, where it has a database, an API. It's a little more built out. I will say the database portion, because if I really wanted to move this to a container, I would bust out the database instead of being right here. The app config saying the database URI for this SQLite database is just local to a test.sqlite3 file. I would build out something to where I would point it to another container. So I wouldn't keep it local to whatever container this Flask application is in. I would build a separate container just for the database, and then have it talk to that. So that way, a couple of reasons. One, if your database fails, your application stays online, even if your database fails, and vice versa. Your database doesn't get corrupt if your application fails for some reason. But then also, if you need to scale your application, right? Let's say your database, for craziest scenario, let's say your database stays small, but your application needs to scale. You can scale Flask as much as you want to multiple containers, and then your database can stay in its own container. Whereas if you coupled the database with the Flask application in the same container and you multiplied it, think about how many databases you'd have, and it's tightly coupled, right? Every container would have a unique database with it. So anyways, that is down the line and something I'm not covering during this stream. All right, so we now have a container. So now we create a Docker file. So within your Python, your project directory, right? We have @py, which has the code. We have the requirements file, which has all the Python dependencies. Obviously, we don't really need all of them. Actually, come to think of it, hold on. Come to think of it, just to avoid this taking forever to build, I'm going to actually create a new virtual environment here. So we're going to do Python virtual VNV. And so I'm going to create a new virtual environment within this project directory. VNV, the folder name is on my .gitignore file, so that's why you see it grayed out, is because it's not tracked via Git, which is by design. So I'm actually going to go into this Python, my new virtual environment, and just install Flask. Pip install Flask. So we'll install Flask and run it again just to make sure everything looks good. $5,000. All right, so we're still good. So really, like I said, very basic application, so we don't need many dependencies, but it's perfect for something like we're doing on stream, because it doesn't have much of a too many dependencies and a lower build time. So let me do pip freeze requirements.txt. and you just saw it kind of change right before your eyes. This is what's the dependencies for our new environment here. And so that should be it. All right. So, all right, let me close that out because that's distracting. All right, so we have our application. We know our project dependencies. Let's start creating our Docker file. So a Docker file, for those that don't know, basically are the instructions for how to build your Docker container. And let me see if I can get a Docker file or file reference. So I haven't read through this whole document. I've read a good amount of it. But basically think of it as a list of like a recipe, right? Let me see if I can find, and I know I got to zoom in here, so just give me a second. I was hoping there would be like a better example. Oops. There we go, Docker file examples. For examples of Docker file, get started. Yeah, I didn't see one there. Here we go. All right, so this is actually going to be one, like something very relative to what we're going to be doing. So you basically have a keywords, right? And those keywords are in this reference file down here along the right side. They all have different meanings. They all mean something different. Obviously, this isn't meant to, like, I'm not going to go through each one and explain. You can definitely go here yourself. Docker file references. If you just Google that, I'm sure you'll find the docs for that. And so there's a couple key ones that we'll look at, and really this kind of outlines what we'll be doing. We'll have from basically provides you a base. So your Docker container can either start from scratch, right, where you build it just from foundation, or Docker provides, or Docker Hub, or Docker Registry, I should say, provides you with sample images or different containers that are already built that kind of do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. One of the most popular is Docker Hub. Let me just load that up here so you can kind of see what that looks like. Docker Hub has all these, is one of the most popular registries out there, and that's what it's called, a Docker registry. But let's say we're interested in Python, right? We have a Python application. So if you look at Python, you'll see that Python has its own repository here. And if we click on tags, you'll see that there's a bunch of different tags. And these tags are, just look at them as different images. And they're built for different image versions, right? So you might have 3.911, 3.911, and if you keep scrolling, you'll have 3.9, 3.8, right? And then all these bullseye, buster, they all have different meanings behind. They're basically just different versions. But you can see based on the compressed size what you're actually looking for. And obviously it's for your different architecture and OS. So you'll see like here something significant. You'll see that the Windows compressed size for Python 3.9, this image, is way bigger than the Linux one, right? Don't know why. Maybe it's Linux versus Python. The different architectures beats me. I normally aim for the slim images, right? So it's best to keep your images and keep your different layers, as they call them. And I totally missed and apologize, I didn't even highlight that. So each of these commands here, they kind of create what Docker is called a kind of a layered architecture, right? So your foundational layer is normally your base image, right? Your from. And then on top, and then you copy your app code, you run specific commands, and then you launch your code. Each of those are layers, right? And you try to keep not necessarily the number of layers at a small number, but the size. So any code that's not necessary to get your application up and running, ignore. And you can use what's called a Docker ignore file for that. Your base image, like this is Ubuntu 18.04. We don't need Ubuntu running, right? We didn't build a shell application or anything like that. We just need Python. And so we're going to stick with one of these Python images that are, of a smaller size. And so, and I actually might stick, there's one already on this, this DevNet VM. There's already one on here. So I actually might stick with this just to show you what that is. So I go down here and do Docker images. You can see there's already Alpine and Slim on here, and you can see the sizes, right? 48.4, 122. I don't know the differences between Slim and Alpine. I may look at that off stream, just so that way I'm familiar. And then they have some other, it looks like just maybe they tested these out because there's no tags associated with them. But I'll use one of these images for now. Nick asks, if you were to use setup environment variables in the container for authentication purposes, would those credentials be in clear text in the Docker file, or is there a way to set that up? Good question. So I read through this, and let me just minimize this real quick. Let me go to the environment section. So I mean, I knew this, the env keyword, you can do key value pairs. The value will be interpreted for other environments. So quote characters will be removed. I thought there was a way. For some reason, I thought there was a way you can mask. Maybe not. But I will say, Nick, a couple ways to answer your question. One, you could, and I've seen this before, where you can create a volume and basically the volume is like think of it as like a network share. That's kind of the way I picture it, right? The Docker container mounts a volume that is, on your PC or on the host. And there's different types of volumes, but you basically can mount a volume that has a file in it that contains all your environment variables. That could be loaded at runtime. I've seen that as an example. Don't know how secure that is. But then on the flip side is if you're building Docker containers in like a CI/CD environment, which a lot of times you are, or a lot of use cases have that, you can use the secrets engine built into the CI/CD pipeline. So I know like GitHub definitely has one, GitLab, they all have like a secrets engine that you basically can fill it in, and then they're variables within your Docker file. So you could do it that way as well. But I mean, for testing purposes here, it looks like I don't see a way. I don't see a way where it would like create any sort of hashed value or anything like that. But yeah, Nick says, I see, didn't think of that. As long as appropriate read permissions are set up. Yeah, the nice part is with your traditional Docker volumes, the Docker process is pretty much has the only permissions, from my understanding, for that. Now, if you do what's called it's not called a binded volume. I think it's just called a binding. But basically, there's like a binded volume. I guess I'll just call it that. I know binding is in the word, and I don't know whether it's just called a binding or a binded volume, but a binded volume to where you can mount any file or folder on the host system. But obviously that opens up for security issues, because if you're mounting to it and other processes on the same host can get access to it, then obviously things can happen, bad actors or whatever. So it's recommended to always use volumes, Docker volumes over a binding. So, hey Blues, how are you doing? I haven't talked to you in forever. Thanks for stopping by the stream. So, yeah. So hopefully that answered your question. And I am very surprised that there's no way to... I'm sure there's a way. I guess let's put it that way. I'm sure there's a way. I just don't have an answer for you, Nick. Yeah, Blues says also to store passwords on a Docker environment, you can use Docker secrets. Yeah, I know Docker. I know you. There's a way for it has its own kind of secrets engine per se. A bind mount. There you go, Nick. There you go. Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about. Yeah, so as Blues mentioned, you can use Docker secrets, and I'm assuming that probably ties in where you could put the secret in for in the Docker file, or reference it, I should say. Anyways, let me pull up. What was I even looking at? Oh, so let's start our Docker file. So we're going to use a base image. Let's try Python 3.9 Alpine. So Python 3.9 Alpine, and you're probably like, okay, how did he get that, right? So as I mentioned, the from keywords for the base image, Python is the name of the Docker image, and then the colon is anything after the colon is your tag. And you'll see down here we already have a Python 3.9 Alpine image. It's only 48 megs, so that's why I chose it. All right, so this spins up a Python 3.9 container. I think the first thing I'm going to do is copy over my code. So we're going to do copy what's in the directory, right, to the root and a random directory in the Docker container called app. And then we're going to set the working directory to app. So now we've spun up a Python 3.9 environment. We copied over the application code, which in this case is just app.py and then requirements.txt. Actually, come to think of it, let me just create a Docker ignore file and make sure that we don't copy over v, because we don't need that. Okay, so I just did that real quick, but basically I created a Docker ignore file. It's a lot like a git ignore file, but Docker ignore basically tells Docker during the build process what files within the directory to ignore. And in this case, I don't want my virtual environment to be copied over, because obviously like all these folders and files, I don't need all that, because that's the beauty of a container is we don't need to create a virtual environment in this container. We build it. If we don't like it, we tear it down and build a new one. So anyways, I created that Docker ignore file. So now we're only copying over the app.py file and the requirements.txt file. And then we set the working directory. So think of it as like doing a CD. We change directories to just the app folder. So now we're in the app folder. And we want to do run pip install. So this is basically a requirement, or just like a shell command. And so we're just running pip install -r requirements.txt. That installs all of our dependencies into the Python interpreter. Like I mentioned, no virtual environment, but so we're doing the system level interpreter, but that's the beauty of containers. Let's see. Just catching up on chat here. Blue says also to store. Okay, use Docker secrets. Nick says bind mount. Yep. Blue says I'm fine, thanks. How are you doing? I'm great. I'm great, Blues. We are. I was showing the schedule before. We dove into some code here. 6 weeks left. 6 weeks, 7 weeks left. So we are in the home stretch. It doesn't seem like it, but I mean it's already halfway through March. So I'm excited, kind of nervous, but pretty excited. Then Blues asked, did you get NSO installed on CWS? I did, but for some reason I can't get it booted up. And I'll actually show that. Remind me towards the end of the stream here. Once I get this Docker image built and ran and shown, I can show you what I got. To answer your question, I got it installed, but I didn't get it running. And I don't know why. But I'm not too worried about it because I have my other Ubuntu VM that's working, and obviously on test day I'm not going to have to install NSO. Hopefully. I mean, I don't know why we'd waste time doing that, but so functionally I have another VM set up for that. All right, so we changed to the working directory. Now we're in /app, and we're going to do a pip install requirements txt to install all of our dependencies, which is this list here. And lastly, I'm going to have to run the application. So you can do this a couple ways. You can use entry point or the CMD keyword. Entry point is technically if you want to run your container as a executable, which I'm not just copying what it's saying there. But if you read through the documentation, entry point is kind of like in order of preference. You have entry point and then kind of CMD below that. So I'm using entry point. And the way you do it is you put in what your executable is. So in our case, we're invoking Python. And then it's kind of like a Python list to where you're just doing an array of what the commands are. And then I'm just doing Python app.py. So now we've copied over the code. We've installed the dependencies, and then our entry point is, okay, what command are we running immediately? And that's something to take note of is if you don't have anything running, like if there's no process that's running in your Docker container, it will fail. You have to have something running, whether it's it's something as simple as a shell command, or a Python file or a Python application. You have to have something running to invoke a process in your Docker container, or it'll just stop and exit with the status code of 1. Or exit code, I'm sorry, status code, exit code. Nick asked, Python or Python 3? Good question. So because we're using the Python 3.9 container, we'll just need to use Python. Python 2's not installed. And that's another beautiful part about containers. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about whether the system has Python 2 installed or you have to add on 3 to the end. All right, so I think we're looking good. Just clean up the extra lines there. And so we have the Docker file. And so let's just do, one last thing is, and this is kind of for documentation purposes, because it technically doesn't, this, like it should, as it says, yeah, the port that this container should listen on. So this is kind of like, just think of it as it's for documentation purposes, because when you build the container, yes, it will by default try to listen on that port, the container will. But remember, when you spin up a Docker container, you do Docker run, and then you identify the host and the container port that will be that they'll listen on. So that's why I say it's more for documentation purposes. Yeah, Nick says, oops, that's right, for force of habit, I guess. Yeah, trust me, I was messing with this the other night, and I thought the same thing. I was like, oh, do I do Python or Python 3? And then another one that gets me is pip. I don't know if it gets you as well. Pip 3 or pip. That's bit me a few times, and so yeah, trust me, I totally get it. All right, so copy the code over, switch to our directory with the code in it. We're exposing port 5000. We installed the dependencies, and we're running the application. Perfect. All right, so let's do a Docker build. Docker build, and we're gonna do in this directory, and I think it's name. I just did all this last night, so we'll just do where's the Docker build? Oh, hold on. Here's the environment replacement. Here you go. Nick, this is what I was trying to describe here. And this is actually what I was thinking in my head, but I was like, oh, maybe I'm thinking of some other scripting language. Environment variables are notated in the Docker file either with a variable name, or variable name. They are treated equivalently. I don't know if that's even a word. And the brace syntax is typically used to address issues with variable names with no white space, like foobar. The variable name syntax also supports a few bash modifiers. Oh, so wait, that's if you want to use the environment variable that you defined in the okay, so it has to be declared with it. Never mind. I thought I might have found your answer, Nick. I apologize. All right, let's get back to usage. So Docker build, and actually, let me just do help here. Let's see what we have available. This is kind of what I was looking for anyways. The tag, yeah. So Nick was mentioning -T for the name and tag. Yep, that's going to be one of the options. I don't know why I just blanked out, because I was like, I got to name this thing. You can do CPU limits. Yeah, so definitely we'll tag it. I thought there was a name attribute, but I think that's also with tag. Tag, yeah. Name and optionally a tag. I'm going to probably not put a tag on it. I'll probably just do Docker build -T. -T, and then we'll do stream Flask. Stream Flask app. All right. All right, it's building. So I just called it stream-flask-app. And see, it's installing all the dependencies. And we're done. So now, that's awesome. It's probably because we already had the container installed. The base image, I should say, the Python 3.9 Alpine image, that was already done. So all we had to do is copy over the app code and then install the dependencies, which you can see is done here. Or it says it's running, and here's the image. Or I'm sorry, the container ID and the tagged, or the name with the tag, and by default latest is the tag that it will put. So if we look at Docker images now, you'll see stream Flask app image latest. It was built 42 seconds ago. It's 59 megs. So basically, going back to that layered approach, we have Python 3.9, which is 48 megs, 48.5 megs, right? And then the different layers, we copied over some code, which, I mean, it has to be less than a meg, with app py and requirements txt. And so there's that, and then all the dependencies with Flask. And so altogether that equaled probably right around 10 megs. So the base image plus Flask dependencies in the application code was another 10 megs, and that's why the final image size is 59 megs. So now the nice part is I could put this up on Docker Hub, and I might do that actually and then send it out. I'll tweet it out or something. And whether you're in the stream or watching the VOD, you can pull this down, and I'll have to find my Docker Hub username and stuff. It's been a while since I signed in, really. But you can do a Docker pull, and then you'll be able to pull down this image. Now you might be like, all right, cool, you have the image. Is it running and is it working? So let's check on that. So Docker PS, we don't have it run. It's not running, or you would see it listed there. We do Docker PS-A. Nothing's running and nothing's in a stop state, which is actually what I expect, because all we did was build the image. We didn't say run it after being built. So in order to run this image, now that we've built it, we'll do Docker run. We'll do -d -d for detach, so in a detached state. If I don't do -d, when I do Docker run and press enter, and let's say put the image name, it will run in this terminal. Kind of like my Flask application, where like it ran in the terminal and I do a Control-C and then it closes out the Flask application. Well, what this does, Docker run -d, it will kind of kick off the container in the background. So that way I don't have to keep this terminal open. So we have -d and then IT. The I stands for interactive, and then the T is terminal. So it allows us to get into the bash kind of into a shell if I need to, into the terminal of the application, or of the container if I need to. I don't expect to, but I always like to have a terminal available. And so we'll just name this streaming. So this is the name of the container, not of the image. So we'll name it the container name streaming, and we will specify the ports. So we're actually going to use port 5000 on, actually we'll do port 8080 just to show the difference. So as you guys know, when you're in debug or in a development state with Flask applications, you're always running on port 5000. And in order just to show the difference, I'm going to run on the host. It's going to be running on port 8080. So I should, through Firefox, be able to go to localhost 8080, and I should be able to get this Flask application. But in the container, it's still running on port 5000. Hopefully that makes sense. So, all right, so we're running it in a detached state with with a terminal available. We're naming the container streaming, and it's running on port 8080 on the host, port 5000 on the container. And then now we just got to put the image name. Like, what are we actually running? And we're going to run the stream Flask app. And I got that name from the image name up here. And I might have did this out of order, but let's see what happens. No? Okay. Sometimes, I don't know why, like, the ordering, like, one time I did it out of, I think it might have been the build. I put the, I put some commands out of order, and it didn't like that. So basically what we have here is the container ID. So it's now, nothing barked at me, so it should be good. So let's do Docker PS, right? This is a lot of good information here. We have the container, and I apologize, it's kind of in like a, actually, you know what, just to make it look a little nicer, I'm going to go to this terminal and go full size with this terminal. Let me see if I can, there we go. Oh, perfect. Sorry for the bright white, the bright white view here. So because Docker's running on this host, it's not just in the, like with Python, it kind of gets freaky because you have to be within the virtual environment, whatever. So we do Docker PS. This is a little easier to read, I think. Let me see. Nick asked, did you set 5000 on the app route decorator? Does that matter? Would it only respond to 80 if not changed? Let me show you real quick. So the way it's running now is because I'm invoking it using the Python app py. Whenever I invoke it using that command, since I'm calling it directly, it's going to use this snippet of code. And app run, so it's running on the host. This basically is equivalent to localhost. Debug equals true, so by default it's 5000, but I believe you can change that here. I could say run it on port 80, and it would run on port 80 of the container, but by default it's port 5000. So all of that would be in this code. You could also use the Flask CLI. So if you export, I forget the environment variable name, I think it's Flask_app, and point it to the app.py, you can do Flask run through the terminal, and it will run the application for you as well. And you can also specify the port through the CLI. But yeah, since I didn't change any of the port, and it would be in this section down here in app.run, by default it's port 5000. Hopefully that answers your question. All right. So back to the running application. So you'll see we have the container ID, very important. The stream, the name of the image that's running, the command that was invoked upon the running the container, when it was created, status is up. It's been up for about a minute. The ports. So this is actually this is easier to read than like going through like what we did with the CLI command there. So you can see it's running on localhost on port 8080, and it's mapped to the port 5000 on the container, and then the name of the container is streaming. And so, so we'll do Docker logs. And we'll do, I'll just do the first, if you do the first couple bits of, the container ID, you can actually view the logs in the container. So you can see this is from this container, and as you see, it's just like if we ran it locally, using Python, Python app py. So obviously we're in a development mode. Well, it says we're in the environment mode. That should say development, but okay. Debug modes. Oh, because I set debug mode on, but I didn't set it to development. Whatever. Okay. So it says it's in quote unquote production, but as they say, use a WSGI server if you want this to actually be production, which I would highly recommend, and that's part of a deployment process that's kind of out of scope for right now. But yes, I agree. You would actually use a production WSGI server, and there's a couple out there. And you can see it's running on this IP. This IP by default, so every Docker container by default gets thrown into the 172.17/16 network. I know we don't talk about networking that much on this, as the nitty gritty of IPs and networking as much as we should when we're in software development mode. But yeah, for all of us, our network engineers minds, it's a /16 network, 172.17/16. .1 is obviously the gateway, so this container got .2, and it's running on port 5000. So that mapping that says, map to port 5000 on the container, well, that's where that's coming from right here. And so I guess the last thing we need to do here is verify that we can, on our local host, reach on port 8080, we should be able to get hello world, and we do. So localhost port 8080, and what I'll do is I'll actually start trailing the logs. And so you'll see real quick, I'll try to put both side by side if I can. Yeah, that'll work. But you can see as I refresh, I'm on port 8080, it's mapped to port 5000, and it's getting logged here. And it says it's coming. Interesting enough, it says it's coming from the gateway, because obviously this computer or this VM is the running the Docker daemon, the service. So it's saying it's coming from that gateway. Nick asked, it would be interesting to have you run REST API calls on an app you deploy with Docker deployments, Git and put posts during the lab. Yes. So Nick, that's a good point, and that's actually something I mentioned in the beginning of the stream. I'm thinking about doing some sort of like final project finale for this, these Road to DevNet expert streams in about mid-April, and that will kind of be one of the tasks there, is building an application that's a little more than just hello world, and then doing REST API calls to the Docker deployments. Let me just make sure I'm reading it right. It would be interesting to have you run REST API calls on an app you deploy. Yes. Yeah, exactly. So either we'll create two things. One, yes, we will create a application that we will make REST API calls to, and it could be a Dockerized containerized application. And then on the flip side, we'll create an application that will interact with a REST API. And ultimately what that will look like is two containers, one container making a REST API call directly to another container without leaving the host. That's kind of what my picture is with that. All right. So one of the last things that we could do, because this VM, the DevNet Expert VM, actually has an IP on my local network. So from my my PC, I should be able to hit 192.168.7.184 and hit port 8080. And so I'll switch over here. We'll pop this up. 192.168.7.184, port 8080. There you go. And you'll see that it's insecure because obviously we don't have a certificate. But yeah, so this 184 address is my DevNet Expert VM that I have up here, which is hosting the Flask, the Docker container. So pretty neat stuff. And what's even cooler about that, I don't think I'll be able to do it, but I'll refresh a couple times here, right? And you'll see it's getting hits from my from my PC. So this is obviously refreshing on the local host. This is like I said, the Docker IP address, the gateway. And then this is actually like from my, technically an external host, since the VM, like I said, is hosted on an ESXi host that's actually under my desk. So pretty neat though. I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. That's why I said, I didn't want to spend too much time on the actual Flask application because, you can see like Nick, I can already see like the brain juices going with what we could build here. That's the nice part, and that's kind of what I've been focusing on with this exam is, I'm looking at all the different nerd knobs that we can turn to make this, easier, whether it's like, we were talking about environment variables, like what's the best way to secure environment variables. I'm looking at that sort of stuff, but I'm also looking at, okay, at a high level, designing an application, how would that look, right? One of the first things, especially with even network engineering, is how does the network look before we start diving into one particular problem, right? Before we start troubleshooting that one trunk link, how does point A to get to point B, right? And that's why, going through all of this, and I mean, it's kind of crazy. You can kind of see the inception here. We have the Docker container, which, localhost port 5000 in the Docker container maps to port 8080 in the VM, which you can see here, localhost 8080. Yep. And now we're on my PC trying to hitting the VM IP address, right? Not a Docker container that's connected to the host network. this is actually the host, the DevNet Expert VM IP, and then port 8080. So pretty neat. Marcos, Dan, how are you? I understand how Docker works, but I would like to know what a Docker is used for in the networking world. Good question. Good question, Marcos. So there's a couple things you can use Docker containers for. And there's different ways to look at it too, right? So for us, particularly for network engineers, you could deploy a telemetry stack. So one of the popular ones, and one that I actually have to know pretty well for the exam, is the TIG stack. So that's Telegraph, InfluxDB, and Grafana. So not necessarily like, oh, you have to know the insides and outs of all those tools, but if you can deploy that, all that stuff's free, right? And it provides you a lot of good information if you know how to set it up. And so understanding Docker will help you set that up with limited resources, right? These containers are much smaller than spinning up large VMs. That's kind of one example. I know that's kind of like okay, I can use other applications for that. Another one is, as I'm sure you know, Cisco has made it very apparent and tries to drive it home, is you can actually host Docker containers on network devices like switches and routers. The nice part about that is a lot of applications can be containerized. So things that you normally would do in troubleshooting efforts that maybe you do now on like an end host or an end user PC. So, I'm sure you've got on a phone call with an end user and it's like, hey, try connecting to this. Hey, what's your download speed look like? You could deploy a tool like iPerf in a container and have that container sit on your switch. So from the switch perspective, what your latency, download speed, you can do synthetic testing using iPerf. Thousand Eyes is a monitoring solution and a kind of another visibility, network visibility solution, and that you can containerize and put on a switch. Wireshark, believe it or not, you can there's a container for Wireshark that you can install. So yeah, I mean, hopefully I answered your question about what it used for in the networking world. If you're from a traditional network engineer background and you're like, okay, I have this BGP configuration, how can I use Docker? I don't have an answer for you. But in this kind of world with network automation, and all network automation mindset is, it's not like, okay, you got to learn Python right now. You have to take the concepts that are out there and that have been well developed, especially in the software development world, and apply it to what we do with network engineering. Because ultimately what we do with network engineering is configure network devices, and all the configuration is, not to kind of burst bubbles, but like your CLI, your traditional CLI, is just a parsing mechanism which translates your configuration and what you put through the CLI. So for example, router BGP, right? Router BGP and then the AS number. That is through the CLI, that's all you type and press enter. Well, in the background, the switch actually takes that, parses that information to spin up the BGP process, configure any sort of neighbor statements you have in there as well. It does a lot of things in the background. So instead of just like looking at just the CLI, we can look at other ways and look at it from a more software development perspective. So see, I can just go on rants. I can just talk in circles. So, but yeah, so the Docker has a few different ways to immediately help you from a traditional network engineering mindset and perspective. I would say troubleshooting is the biggest. And a lot, besides, I mentioned Cisco, but there's a lot, like white box switching is becoming popular. You can spin up Docker containers on a lot of any x86 hardware, and even I believe on ARM as well you can. I don't know though. So yeah, so hopefully that answers your question, Marcos. Okay, so that's all I had really for tonight. The thing that's challenging with Docker is, there's a lot that I could, as I was talking about earlier, right? You can spin up an app, you can spin up a database, which I plan to do to make sure that, they can communicate, but like it's hard to kind of all do it, especially on just a 1-2 hour stream. And I want to keep it engaging to where you can kind of take what I'm doing and extrapolate it to the nth degree. So Marcus says, thanks, good explanation. Yeah, if that's what it was, I felt like I rambled, so I apologize, Marcus, but I'm glad you got something from that. Nick says, a web page has a custom dashboard to show you network stats, maybe? Yeah. I mean, you can do anything with it. I mean, think about what we did here, right? Now, it would take me a minute, but you could go back in this app code. You go back in this app code, you change it up, you rebuild the image, right? So this is kind of where now you're like, okay, let's take the CI/CD concepts, right? Where you change your app code and then something happens, right? When you do a commit to and do a push to GitLab or GitHub, you have your code linters, you have a build process. For specifically with like with Flask, what you could do is, let's say I wanted to add a route for Git network stats. I would add that into the code here, save it, commit my changes, and push it to GitLab or GitHub. And then I would have in my CI/CD process where it would just do this again. I would have the Docker file. It would, pull down this image if it wasn't already cached. It would copy over my code. It would install all my requirements again, if not cached, and then it would deploy the application. So that's where the iterative process comes from, where you don't have to worry about like, oh, I changed my code, I better send these files to my partner. No, you check it into your source code. It automatically generates the Docker container for you, or the image, right? And oh, by the way, once you have that image, your CI/CD process can also deploy it, or I should say just push it up to like Docker Hub and deploy it if you want, but push it up to Docker Hub that any one of us could pull down, or an internal container Docker repository, right? So it's like, when you think of it from that perspective, it really is like, okay, that's insane. That's really like, that's where it starts really starts moving. That's where the train, start going downhill. Marcus says, I'm asking this because I always try to learn how I can apply it in the real world, and I prefer to learn via practice instead of read. Totally agree with you, Marcus. Practicing is the only way to actually like learn something, because you mess up. If you read stuff, great, and it might teach you some things, but messing up and practice is what you need to really understand a lot of this stuff. So, all right, so I'm gonna go ahead and, like I said, I think that's all. Oh, one last thing before I kind of wrap up here. So there's another command called docker inspect, right? And I think I can use the name of the container. Yeah, I can. So docker inspect is kind of neat because it gives you all this all this data about your application. It gives you IP addresses. It tells you if you're binded to any sort of volumes. Shows you your entry point, right? Let me see. Let me try to find some interesting stuff for you. Networks, CPU utilization, or limits. There is one about IP address, network information. Here we go. So you can see here, if the bridge it's connected to, it's just the default create another network. The ports. So you can see, the host IP, the host port, host IP, host port. Hold on. Host IP. Oh, this is IPv4 and this is IPv6. But you can see like port 5000. So Docker Inspect gives you a lot of, oh, here we go. The IP address of the container, the gateway, the MAC address, information about the specific bridge. So every network has obviously a network ID. You can create a custom network, which we didn't do here. It's actually recommended to do, is to create a custom network for a variety of reasons. One being that in a user-defined network, I should say, all your containers can talk to one another via hostname versus IP address. So if I wanted, right now, if I spun up a database image or a database container and I said, hey, I want my Flask app to talk to it, I would have to specify the IP, the container IP. But if I created if I define a Docker network and put these devices in the Docker network, in my Docker network, they could talk to one another, kind of like basically DNS, where you could say, okay, my current container name is called streaming, and let's say I had another one called streaming-db, they could talk to one another via the host name versus the IP. So pretty neat. And that's just things, like I said, reviewing documentation and kind of practicing all this. It's interesting. I mean, it's tiring, but it's interesting, to say the least. It's just, there's just so much. That's kind of, I guess, the bottom line. I'm kind of getting to the point where there's just so much, and to kind of get to that quote unquote expert level knowledge of every single component, it's tough to think about, especially when you look at things like Docker. Not so much. Docker actually comes pretty easy to me. I'm kind of drawing a blank, but there's other subjects that I'm like, man, how deep do I have to go? Or like Python libraries, and I'm like, I know them, but like, do I know them? Like, I know I'm always self-proclaimed, like, I love PyTS and Genie, and I go through those documents like all the time, but it's like, I always feel like I learn something new about it every time, so I'm like, do I really know all of it? Or not all of it, but like, do I have a good understanding of it? So yeah, I'm kind of in that weird, like, because as you know, I think I mentioned this before, this will be my first expert level exam I've taken. And so, like, the whole experience, traveling to a testing location, taking it in a practical lab environment, it's all new to me. So I'm not too nervous about that piece, but like thinking about, okay, like, do I have all my ducks in line, basically, like everything? Am I good in this? Am I good with Ansible? Am I good with Terraform? Like, it's just all like starting to, like, as the time comes closer, as May 3rd creeps up, it's starting to hit me like, okay, like, expert level. Am I expert level at this? Nick says, from time to time, I mind blank on things I've been working on daily, so I know what you're saying right now about this dev tech. Yeah, and it's it's different too, because it's like, you always hear, like, Nick, I believe you're a CCIE, like, that experience, like, I have more respect for CCIEs now than I ever have, especially knowing, like, the amount of effort you're putting into learning and kind of developing a mastery with some of these subjects, but then also kind of knowing, like, okay, you have to travel to a testing site, and you'll be in a practical lab setting, and like specifically with this exam, I don't know what it is with the CCIE, but like the 3-hour development design, software design piece in the beginning, like if you fail that, then you don't even get the second part. So like, it's just, I don't know, it's starting to all like come hit me. Marcos says you can do it. Hey, I appreciate it, Marcos. I appreciate it. Thank you. And I appreciate that you're here in the chat. Nick says it's a lot of material to remember. We'll forget real fast once exams are done. Yeah. But that's the thing though. Like, and you're a former CCIE. Yeah, but still, I respect it. I really do. Like, I know there's the whole recertification process, but like if you did it once, I mean, this is a journey, and like most of you in the chat right now, you guys have seen it since the beginning of the year that I've started doing this, the Road to DevNet expert stream. So yeah, I can still respect it though. It's crazy, and but anyways, going back to like what you're saying, you'll forget it once the exams are done. Yeah, I'm sure I'll forget some sort of the minor details, but the thing that's different with this is like with networking, it's like networking, you learn like maybe some specific detail of logging, right? Like something that you're like, I don't use that in my day-to-day like configs. So yeah, I'll learn it for the exam, but I may not use it in my day-to-day configs. Now, whether I should or not is a whole other question. But like with this though, with it being more software development focused and just like being in that software ecosystem, right? Your development design, your different Python libraries, the different tools, when to use them, when not to, knowing the ins and outs of the tools to a degree. The thing that's different is like the tools develop themselves, over time are developed and, updated to a point where, like, for example, APIs. I'm glad up to this point, all the DevNet exams I've taken, the API documentation's been pretty well done, but they don't really test you on like you must know this API to the nth degree, because I think Cisco acknowledges that APIs change, right? Version 0, version 1, version 2. Same thing with software. So yeah, I mean, to a degree, I think I'll forget some of the minor details, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't know. I feel like I'm in it. I'm real in it. I'm real far in it. Nick says, it's a lot of pressure to be a CCIE. Had a manager expecting me to also be a Juniper expert when I was a noob with that product or vendor. Yeah, that's interesting. So they expect you to be a CCIE and a Juniper expert? That's sounds like 2 jobs in one there. But all right. Well, let me actually just push this up real quick. I'm gonna go ahead and push up this code, so that way you guys can see it. Let me make sure. You just make sure that untracked files. Your branch is up to date. Nothing added, but present. Oh, let me just do git add. Okay, so yeah, all right. Just want to make sure that the virtual environment wasn't being added. So Docker ignore Docker file requirements. Okay, so we'll do a git commit, and we'll say Flask app built on stream. And we'll do a git push. Done. All right, so that's there, and just pop open my GitHub just to and I'll put it in the chat as well. Let me pop over here. All right, so I just put it in the chat. Nick says the idea that by virtue of CCIE that I was also a Juniper expert. Oh yeah, that makes sense. Why weren't you? That's the real question. Why weren't you? Nick says no, I'm an expert on Cisco products. I was learning Juniper at the time, route and switch. Yeah, but hey, sounds like you should have been a Juniper expert just because you're an expert. Just a general expert at everything. That's funny though. It sucks. It sounds like, especially coming from a manager, I'm sure you felt some pressure there. Okay, so that commit hit, obviously, Flask app built on stream. So I put the link in the chat for those. I know I put it in probably once a stream. If you'd like to follow or contribute to it, feel free. Like if you go through some of these and you're like, hey, there's nothing here, or Dan, you didn't do this right, or this is too simple, please feel free to contribute. Open up a fork the repository, open up a pull request. Clay Curtis, as you see, I mean, I don't know if he's in the stream, but he's helped tremendously. He's been a part of these streams in the past, and he actually forked and actually made an improvement that I actually really liked. And so I accepted it, the pull requests, and merged, and did some Git things like that. So yeah, obviously all this is for learning purposes. So feel free to use any of the code. I do try to make note of when it's not necessarily, I may follow like a DevNet learning lab or something like that. So that way, if you want more context on the code, you can go to that respective learning lab. But yeah, I try to keep all my code examples here. To be honest, I don't do a really good job. I try to put as much as I can in these folders, but sometimes I just do things off to the side and forget to add them here. But anyways, this is the repository. And what else was I going to bring up? Oh, and I also have another repository on GitLab. I'm not going to go into it, but basically, whenever I realized that the lab exam is going to, you have a GitLab environment to do, the test, I kind of started developing on this in this GitLab project as well. Same exact username, same repository name. So literally the only thing different is the domain. Instead of github.com, it's gitlab.com. And you can find some code examples here as well. So, but there's a link to that. So, I guess if there's anyone have any questions, I know I'm probably like 20 seconds ahead, so I'll kind of just wait. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll be wrapping up the stream here. And I appreciate everyone being here. I know, quick shout out to, I've actually, I really do appreciate the comments, as they, on Twitter. John Capabianca recently put on Twitter, I think like just right before this, like 5-6 p.m. Eastern. I tweeted out. I try to tweet out and just remind people that I'm streaming tonight and whatnot. And John kind of retweeted it and went above and beyond in my eyes and put out there and said, "Hey, this guy puts in some good work and you should really follow him, and we'll try to get him to 2K followers or whatever." And there's a couple others that made some really nice comments about helping them out, and kind of it seems like everyone is appreciating this learning in public, right? And so I just want to say thank you to everyone that's watching the stream or watching the VOD. So just a big thank you. That's why I do it for everyone. I try to do it to show like, hey, everyone can do it, and you guys have seen me screw up on this stream, and I try to do the best I can with what I have. So thanks, Nick. You have a good night as well. I try to make the streams good. So Kubernetes next week. Marcus says thanks. Yeah, thank you, Marcus. Thank you for being here. As always, if you guys have questions, I'm on Twitter. I'm on Discord, Art of Network Engineering Discord. Probably the best place to message me. That's the one I'm most active on, I would say. And I'm as most active as I can be. There's so many apps these days: Slack, Discord, YouTube, Twitter. Like I try to get on when I can. So if you see me, I'm on there. And if you tag me, I'll get a notification. But I just have so much going on. Nick says, I had to look for your tweet last week, and then I saw that you weren't doing it. Hope you were okay. Yeah, I appreciate that, Nick. Yeah, I caught like a 24-hour bug or something like that. I just wasn't feeling that great. and I try to keep some sort of, I want to keep the energy up on the stream. So I figured instead of trying to fight through something, it was definitely, my body it was just saying, hey, let's just take a break for a night. So, yeah, but I appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks for hoping I was okay. But yeah, I'm good. There's nothing crazy came out of it. So, all right. Well, I hope you all have a great weekend. And I'm on the East Coast, and the weather looks good this weekend for the most part. Warmer weather, at least. So hopefully, wherever you're at, you're having decent weather, and you can enjoy the weekend. But I will talk to you all. If I don't talk to you on Twitter, I will see you. Let me see. Marco says, think and answer. Maybe I'll ask same how to apply Kubernetes in the network world. Yeah. Hey, Marcos, hold me to that. And Blues, I apologize. I did not show you the NSO installation. But basically, there's an error message whenever I try initializing an NSO instance. I'd have to pull up the error message, but for some reason it doesn't work on that VM. But anyways, yeah, Marcus, I fully expect it. I like answering those sort of questions, how we can apply things to the network world, because ultimately that's why we're here, right? We could take in all these different technologies and what's hot this week, but why you're using it is the biggest question. How's it going to help you? So, all right. Well, thanks for stopping by, everyone. And I will talk to you all next Thursday. See ya.
Hold me close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays.